You wake up on a pile of straw that smells like mildew, sheep, and choices you didn't consciously make. The rooster has been screaming since before the sun showed up, and your neck feels like it lost a bar fight with a sack of rocks. Congratulations. It's another thrilling day in your life as a medieval cooper. That's right. You make barrels. Round ones, short ones, big ones, wet ones, and none of them get you paid particularly well. Your workshop is a small, timber frame structure that looks like it was designed by someone who gave up halfway through and said, "Yeah, good enough." There are wood shavings everywhere, including places wood shavings shouldn't be. Like your bed, your socks, your soul. Your job, if you can really call it that, involves shaping wooden staves, those vertical slats that give a barrel its iconic shape, and forcing them into obedient submission using heat, iron hoops, and some good old-fashioned passive-aggressive hammering. You're basically a wood therapist with tools and unresolved back pain. But before we dive any deeper into the very sexy and luxurious world of medieval barrel making, take a second to do something modern and far more glamorous than anything in your daily life. Click that little thumbs up icon and subscribe to the channel. Only if you actually enjoy what we're doing here, of course. And seriously, drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. It's always fun to see who's willingly subjecting themselves to this kind of medieval misery voluntarily from places like Wisconsin or the Philippines. Now, back to your riveting existence. You roll out of your straw pile, generously called a bed, and instantly step on a splinter the size of a dagger. Classic. You limp over to a basin of water that hasn't been changed in 3 days, splash some on your face, and pretend it counts as hygiene. There's no soap, of course. Just hope. And maybe a rag that might once have been clean in 1371. You head outside and are immediately greeted by the smell of damp earth, pig manure, smoke, and whatever your neighbor Thomas is cooking. Which, judging by the smell, might be his boots. Your workshop is already unlocked because nobody steals anything in your village unless it's edible, drinkable, or somehow capable of starting a fire. You enter the dusty space that is both your place of business and a slowly decaying monument to back pain. On your workbench are the usual suspects, a froe, a draw knife, a mallet, some curved planes, and that one gouge you swear you sharpened last week but is now somehow more blunt than your sense of optimism. Everything is covered in a fine coating of sawdust, which, like regret, sticks to everything. First order of the day, staves. You need to make a new batch because someone at the inn dropped an entire cask of ale last night after getting into an argument about whether geese are demons or just angry birds with better PR. So, you grab a few oak logs. Oak is the good stuff. Durable. Watertight. Heavy enough to cause a hernia if you so much as look at it wrong. You start splitting the logs using your froe and mallet, breaking them down into wedge-like shapes that, if coaxed properly, will someday become barrel staves. Assuming your wrists hold out. And now the fun part. You shave and plane these staves into gentle curves using a draw knife, which requires the physical strength of a blacksmith and the fine motor skills of a watchmaker. You sit on your cooper's horse, a type of shave horse, not an actual horse, which would be infinitely more helpful, and start pulling the draw knife toward you. The shaving process is slow, repetitive, therapeutic, in the way that only 1,000 identical movements can be. Like churning butter, or lying awake at 3 a.m. remembering something embarrassing you did 6 years ago. Each stave must be shaped perfectly. Not just kind of round. Not just close enough. No, barrels don't tolerate imperfection. If the curve is even slightly off, the whole thing leaks like a monk's vow of silence near a wine cellar. And while you're shaping these staves, you think about your life choices. Or more accurately, the lack thereof. You didn't really choose to be a cooper. Your father was one. His father was one. His father might have tried to be a juggler once, but it didn't end well. So here you are, in a long line of people whose greatest legacy is airtight wooden containers. By midday, you've got enough staves for one barrel. One. That's the medieval equivalent of making a sandwich and calling it a career milestone. You take a break. Lunch is barley porridge. Again. Always barley. Sometimes there's a scrap of onion in there if the gods are feeling generous. You sit outside on a log and eat your mush while watching a goose menace a small child. It's the only entertainment you'll get today. Back in the workshop, it's time to assemble the cask. This is the part that separates the barrel-slinging amateurs from the true artisans of containment. You begin by arranging the staves upright in a temporary metal hoop, forming a loose, skeletal circle. It wobbles. It sighs. It disrespects you on a metaphysical level. You tighten the hoop, tap each stave into place, and then, you guessed it, heat the entire thing over an open fire. Yes, fire. Because nothing says precision craftsmanship like setting your half-finished work ablaze and hoping it becomes more obedient under thermal duress. The heat makes the wood pliable, bendable, submissive. You use heavy ropes and a winch to pull the ends of the staves inward, gradually shaping the barrel's distinctive hourglass figure. It's like corsetry, but for trees. Once the basic shape is there, you hammer on permanent iron hoops. You have to work quickly before the wood cools and hardens again. You hit things with a hammer. You hit your thumb. You scream internally. You keep going. Then comes the fitting of the heads, the circular ends of the barrel that seal it shut. You carve a groove into the inside of the staves, a crow's, so the head can sit snugly. You slide the head in, tap it down, and pray to Saint Drogo, the patron saint of coffee and unattractive people, that it doesn't fall out the moment someone tries to use it. And then, you test it for leaks. You fill the barrel with water. Sometimes beer, if the client is fancy. You roll it, tap it, listen, inspect the seams. If you see a leak, you curse in Latin, even if you don't know Latin, and go back to shaving staves like you're trying to sandpaper your way to inner peace. Now, here's a fun fact to keep you awake, or maybe help you sleep. The word cooper comes from a Latin cupa, meaning barrel. This makes you a barrel person by profession and probably by personality. You are literally defined by your relationship with a large wooden tube. Unless you think barrels are just rustic furniture or tavern props for Dungeons & Dragons campaigns, remember this: without barrels, there is no storage, no shipping, no wine, no salted fish, no pickles, no gunpowder, no soap, no medieval apocalypse prepping. Just a lot of loose, wet, uncontained disappointment. You are the unsung hero of trade and preservation. You keep food from rotting, liquids from spilling. And yet, no one sings ballads about the cooper. There are no poems, no stained glass windows, just back pain and a deeply intimate knowledge of timber density. Your fingers are stained from tannins. Your nails are chipped. Your lower back is planning a mutiny. But hey, at least your barrels are symmetrical. As the sun begins to lower, because medieval work days last until your body tells you enough or your tools disappear in the darkness, you clean up. Or pretend to. You sweep some sawdust into a pile and then scatter it again, just to make it look like something happened. You drink a little weak ale, because water is a gamble and you've had enough dysentery for 1 decade. You sit by the fire, which crackles with the quiet disapproval of someone who knows you'll be back tomorrow. You rub your sore hands. You smell like oak, iron, and poor decisions. But hey, your barrels don't leak. You don't dream of fame or fortune. Just maybe a better mallet. One that doesn't feel like hitting things with a brick tied to a regret. Outside, the wind howls gently through the trees. Somewhere, a bard is singing a song about a knight, or a king, or a goose. But not you. Never you. You are a cooper. And that is somehow everything. And now, sleep. We left off, and yes, now we get into the economic, political, and social context of your barrel-filled existence. You'll learn more about how a cooper fits into medieval life, how trade functioned with or without barrels, and what it actually costs to be a mediocre craftsman in a world powered by soup and superstition. You wake up again. Not because you slept well, but because a chicken stepped on your face. Again. The sun hasn't even breached the thatched rooftops of your charmingly damp village, but your body has already accepted its fate, another day as a cooper. Your lower spine issues a formal complaint, your knees have the emotional range of a gravel pit, and your fingers ache with the familiar stiffness of someone whose primary love language is oak. You wipe chicken droppings off your forehead and sit up on your straw bedding, which has now evolved into a complex biosphere of mites, dust, and bad decisions. You stretch your arms and feel something pop. That was probably important. Your breakfast is a chunk of yesterday's bread and something that might be cheese. You're not sure. You eat it anyway. It's either going to build character or give you parasites. Win-win. Then, it's off to the workshop. Again. Except today. As you shuffle across the muddy path in your too thin boots, you're not just thinking about barrels. You're thinking about money. Or rather, the absence of it. Because here's the thing about being a cooper. People need barrels, yes, but they don't necessarily want to pay for them. You're essential. But in the same way medieval sewage ditches are essential, nobody thanks them until they stop working. The economy you're part of is mostly a mix of barter, begging, and barely legal trade routes. Actual coinage exists, of course. You've seen it. Silver pennies, gold nobles, all those glittery things used by people who don't step in pig slop for a living. But most of your transactions involve goods and services. You fix 3 ale casks, and the tavern owner lets you drink for free. You make a salt barrel, and the fishmonger gives you a slightly less rotting mackerel. You are, economically speaking, stuck in the friend zone of commerce. So you wonder, in between hammer strikes and stave shavings, what determines your pricing? What gives your work value? In theory, guilds are supposed to help. If you're in a larger town or you bribed someone to get your name on a list, you might be part of the local Coopers Guild. These are semi-organized groups of artisans who collectively decide things like quality standards, prices, training methods, and who gets to call themselves a master without anyone throwing rotten cabbage at them. But you, dear Cooper, live in a rural village where the closest thing to a guild is an old man named Jeff who claims he once made barrels for a bishop. Jeff hasn't held a hammer in 6 years, and he smells like damp socks and lying, but everyone still listens to him because he's the only person in the area with more than 5 teeth. So without a formal guild to protect you, you're at the mercy of the local economy. Which, to be clear, is less economy and more organized scarcity with bonus fleas. A typical barrel might be worth somewhere between 6 and 12 pence, depending on size, quality, and whether the customer has actual money or just another chicken to barter. You spend days making something watertight and elegant, only to be paid in paltry and vague promises. Truly, you are the unsung artisan of damp capitalism. But still, you endure. Because barrels are in demand. Wine barrels, ale casks, dry goods barrels, pickling tubs, gunpowder kegs, soap tubs, herring containers, olive barrels. If you're lucky enough to live in a place where olives are a thing instead of just a myth whispered about by wandering merchants, your product is necessary for shipping, storage, fermentation, and preserving things people will eat in February when fresh food is just a cruel memory. You are a one-person logistics solution, a rustic Tupperware engineer, an ancient storage unit with back problems. And while you're hammering away at yet another hoop, you hear distant bells, church bells. A signal of the hour. Possibly noon. Possibly the start of a funeral. Or both. Time is an illusion when you measure your life in shavings. You wipe sweat from your brow and look at your half-finished work. You've got 4 barrels drying, 2 leaking, and 1 that mysteriously exploded last night. That one will need something. Probably divine intervention. You sigh and keep working. Now, let's talk politics. Because nothing says relaxing bedtime story like feudal taxation systems. As a humble craftsman in medieval Europe, you owe taxes. Not just to your local lord, who generously protects you from being murdered by someone marginally more violent, but also to the church, the crown, and sometimes to random people who show up with a sword and say they're collecting levies. Your taxes aren't simple. You don't just pay a percentage of your income. No, that would be too convenient. You might owe your lord 2 barrels of wine per year, or 10 days of unpaid labor repairing roads you don't use, or a pig if it's Pentecost, or a chicken if someone named Margaret gets married. It's all very official and totally not arbitrary at all. There are tolls at bridges, tariffs on imported goods, and guild dues if you're in a town that takes that sort of thing seriously. And don't forget the tithe. 10% of your income or output goes to the church, which is busy praying for your soul while constructing buildings you'll never be allowed to enter without cleaning yourself first. So when you finally do get paid, say 6 shiny silver pennies for a beautifully crafted wine cask, you immediately have to hand over half of it to someone in a nicer hat than yours. You're not poor. You're economically ventilated. But even so, you keep building. Because despite the economics, the taxes, and the very real possibility of developing a hernia from lifting half-done barrels, this job gives you something. Not pride, necessarily. Not joy. But something resembling purpose. A wooden container you can point to and say, I made that. with these splinter-covered hands and this one functional vertebra. And sometimes, just sometimes, you get commissioned for something special, like a watertight cask for long-distance wine shipping, or a gunpowder barrel for a lord's personal supply. Those projects make you feel almost relevant. But those jobs are rare. Most of your days are just the slow, repetitive ritual of shaping, assembling, tightening, and sealing. Speaking of sealing, let's pause to appreciate the art of making a barrel actually not leak. Because this, more than anything, is your moment of craftsmanship. You've selected the wood, seasoned oak, ideally. You've shaped the staves to fit snugly together, their curved edges hugging one another like drunk cousins at a medieval wedding. You've bent them with fire and force. You've hammered on the hoops. But a good cooper doesn't just rely on pressure and hope. No, you use something called caulking. That's where you take a sliver of reed, rush, or even hemp and wedge it into any visible gap between the staves. You then smear it with a paste, sometimes wax, sometimes pitch, sometimes something your grandfather called miracle gunk and refused to explain. Then, you fill the barrel with water and wait. If it leaks, you recaulk. Or if it's especially bad, you just burn the whole thing and start over while whispering profanities at the wood grain. You take pride in the fact that your barrels rarely leak, even if your roof does, even if your shoes do, even if your social life definitely does. As the sun sinks below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, you sit outside your workshop with your final cask of the day resting beside you. It's a thing of quiet beauty, sturdy, balanced, round, and entirely hollow. Like your dreams in winter. You lean back and sip some weak ale. You stare at the sky and wonder how many more barrels you'll make before someone invents the cardboard box. Probably all of them. Because you are a cooper. And you live in a world where wood holds everything together: food, drink, goods, and occasionally, your sanity. Tomorrow, you'll wake up and do it all again. Unless, of course, that chicken decides to step on your face again. In which case, all bets are off. You wake up. Again. It's market day. And by market day, I mean the one day of the week when everyone in your village and several nearby ones descends upon a suspiciously muddy patch of land to argue over goats, sniff questionable cheeses, and pretend the local baker's wife isn't actively poisoning her husband's competition. You roll off your mattress, a pile of straw and good intentions, and try not to inhale too deeply. It smells like fermented regret and wet sheep outside, which is, in many ways, the signature scent of the medieval economy. But you've got barrels to deliver. You spend all week finishing off 4 mid-size casks, 1 brine tub, and a flour barrel that still smells faintly of smoked eel. You don't ask questions anymore. You lift each barrel onto your pushcart, something that may have once been a wheelbarrow in a more optimistic lifetime, and begin the long, jarring, deeply unpleasant walk to the market square. It's 2 miles over uneven terrain, most of which is either mud, more mud, or a combination of mud and animal tragedy. No one ever mentions how loud medieval transportation is. Everything squeaks, groans, or clanks. Your cart will make a noise like it's dying slowly. It probably is. But eventually, after being passed by a noble on horseback who didn't even try not to splash you, you arrive. The market is already in full swing. There's a pig screaming in the background. There's always a pig screaming. You suspect it's the same pig, week after week, just moving between owners in a never-ending loop of betrayal. The air is thick with the aroma of frying onions, burning tallow, stale ale, and something someone is calling meat stew with a suspiciously vague smile. Children dart between stalls like human-shaped squirrels. A juggler drops everything he touches. A priest is yelling at a fishmonger for reasons neither of them appear to understand. You set up near the edge of the square, next to a cobbler who smells like boiled feet and a candle maker who keeps getting wax in his beard. He nods at you. You nod back. There is a silent solidarity between people whose jobs involve repetitive wrist trauma and long-term exposure to flammable materials. So let's talk about the other tradesfolk in your world. Because while you're a cooper, maker of all things barrel-shaped, you're surrounded by others whose lives are equally miserable but in slightly different flavors. The blacksmith, for example. Everyone respects the blacksmith. Not necessarily likes, but respects. He works with fire and iron and hits things with a hammer so aggressively that the sound of it is practically medieval punctuation. The mun is a furnace of muscle and rage. He probably has more back hair than sense. He smells like hot metal and burnt toast, and if you anger him, your horseshoes might mysteriously come out wrong. Then there's the baker. The baker is the closest thing this village has to a celebrity. He controls bread. And in a world where most of your meals are some variant of gruel, bread is king. The baker's wife is even more powerful. She knows everything. Gossip flows through her like yeast through dough. Her smile is a threat wrapped in flour. The tanner is, well, the tanner lives downstream. On purpose. Because he works with rotting animal hides soaked in urine. His workshop smells like a corpse in a hot swamp. No one makes eye contact with the tanner. He probably likes it that way. The weaver is a quiet soul who spends 12 hours a day making fabric no one can afford. He coughs a lot. You don't ask why. And the potter, who is currently arguing with the local scribe over the price of an inkpot, is always covered in some dried, crusted mystery. Clay, hopefully. Something worse, possibly. You are all part of the great artisan ecosystem, a network of interdependent suffering. You need the blacksmith for your barrel hoops. He needs your barrels to hold the charcoal he burns. The brewer needs your casks. The tavern needs the brewer. The villagers need ale to survive conversations with their in-laws. It's all deeply interconnected. Like a flea-infested web, a very necessary mediocrity. You try selling your barrels. A fishmonger stops by. He squints, taps a cask, sniffs it, licks it for some reason, then offers you half a smoked trout and a copper coin. You counter. He doubles the trout, throws in a questionable sausage, and walks away when you ask for actual payment. Barter is the language of the market. Money exists, technically, but it's usually held by people who don't like to part with it. Most folks trade in objects, services, or vague promises of favors you'll never see fulfilled. Eventually, you make a deal with a brewer's apprentice who pays you in actual coin. 3 pennies and a slice of hard cheese. It's your most successful transaction in weeks. You celebrate by buying an onion and not sharing it. As you sit and nibble your victory onion, a town crier begins shouting the day's news. Apparently, the duke's son fell off a horse. The bishop declared a fast day for reasons no one understands. And there's been another wolf sighting. Which is normal. It's medieval Europe. Wolves are just nature's tax collectors. Then the tax collector actually shows up. He's a wiry man with eyes like boiled marbles and a hat that screams, "I am about to ruin your day." He makes a beeline for you, sniffs once, and demands your market tax. It's 1 penny per day to sell here. You hand it over. You consider weeping, but there's no time. The sun is high, the mud is drying, and you have 1 more barrel you might unload if you bribe the tavern boy. You make the deal. He gives you a broken chicken feather and a thank you. You will never see that barrel again. Market days are long, noisy, sticky. A blend of commerce, social performance, and mutual suffering. They are necessary, frustrating, and full of people pretending they're not jealous of the peddler who claims he wants up Paris. As evening falls, you pack up what's left of your wares and start the long, clattering journey home. You smell like a mixture of sweat, onions, and economic disappointment. But you did make 3 pennies. That's enough to buy bread, maybe some salted beans, and, if you stretch it, a candle that doesn't explode when lit. You pass by the local monastery on the way home. You hear chanting. It's either Vespers or someone dropped a hymn book on their foot. Monks wave politely. You wave back. They make barrels too, sometimes. Bad ones. But no one says so out loud. Back in your hut, you eat your hard-earned bread and cheese. You light your candle. You stare into the flame and think, I should really fix that leaky salt cask tomorrow. Then you lay back on your straw mattress. Your feet throb. Your hands twitch from hours of pushing, lifting, and pretending to negotiate like a merchant. But you are a cooper. You do the necessary work. The quiet work. The work no one writes songs about. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. Unless the tanner invites you to his cottage. In which case, run. You wake up, again. It's early. Probably. The sun hasn't fully committed to being awake yet, and neither have you. There's a rooster screaming like someone just told it about taxes. You blink, roll over, and realize you fell asleep with a wooden shaving stuck to your cheek. It's still there. It belongs to yesterday's bung plug. Your hands already hurt, and you haven't even touched a tool yet. Outside, it's foggy. The kind of fog that makes you question your eyesight, your choices, and whether that tree is moving or you're just still dreaming. You shuffle into your workshop, which is not so much a building as it is a drafty lean-to held together by prayer, cobwebs, and whatever wood scraps you had left after finishing your last wine cask. The air smells like damp timber, burned pitch, and stale ambition. You light a candle. It flickers in protest. You stare at your workbench, the altar upon which all your hopes, dreams, and lumbar stability go to die. And then, one by one, you begin the sacred ritual of laying out your tools. Let's take a moment to admire the very specific, very dangerous, very medieval instruments that shape your daily torment. First, the froe. This is a wedge-shaped blade with a handle perpendicular to it. You use it to split wood along the grain. To the untrained eye, it looks like someone jammed a stick into an old cleaver, which is basically what it is. You hammer the back of the blade with a mallet to split planks from logs. This is a great way to start your day with splinters and existential dread. Next up, the draw knife. Ah yes, the medieval solution to what if shaving wood was also an upper body workout. A draw knife is a long, straight blade with handles at both ends. You hold it like you're praying your wrists don't give out, then pull it toward you to smooth, shape, and thin down staves. It's surprisingly satisfying, until you slip and almost shave off your kneecap. You have at least 3 different adzes. Adzes are like axes that got confused halfway through puberty. Their blades are mounted sideways, like a hoe, and they're perfect for carving, scooping, and generally creating concave surfaces. You use them to hollow out things, like your soul, and your cask interiors. There's the cooper's axe, or the broad axe, which is less of a tool and more of a statement. It's hefty, impractical for anything subtle, but it's what you use when you need to rough out staves from logs. It's also perfect for accidentally removing your big toe, if you get too confident. Then there's the shave horse. Not a real horse, unfortunately. Just a wooden bench with a foot-operated clamp. You sit on it, press down with your feet, and hold your wood in place while shaping it. It creaks with every movement and is exactly as comfortable as it sounds. Your thighs hate it. Your calves hate it. Your spine has filed for separation. You also have a compass. Not the point north kind, the drawing kind. It's a metal tool you use to mark circles and measure diameters. Very important when making barrels that don't wobble like drunk pigs. You reach for your crow's next. A tool so niche, no one outside of your profession even knows it exists. It's basically a little plane or cutter used to carve the groove near the end of the barrel where the head, or lid, will slot in. If you do it wrong, your barrel leaks and everyone pretends not to be mad. And then, yes, the howl. The howl is a weird, curved tool used to smooth the inside of staves. It looks like someone tried to make a spoon, failed, and decided to weaponize it. You use it to make sure your barrels don't have weird lumps or splinters inside. Because nothing says, I hate this ale, like drinking it with a mouthful of jagged wood. Don't forget your cooper's plane, a tool designed specifically to shape the narrow ends of the staves so they fit snugly against the barrel head. It's exact, fussy work, and if you do it wrong, the entire barrel will warp and everyone will laugh at you. Again, there's also the driver, which is not a person with a cart, but a tool used to pound the hoops down onto the barrel. It's basically a hammer that has seen too much. And then, of course, there's your hoop driver and hoop dog, not medieval euphemisms, I promise. These are actual tools. The hoop dog helps you pull iron hoops tightly around the barrel before hammering them into place with the driver. Using them requires precision, muscle, and the willingness to smash your thumb into a new shape at least twice a week. All of these tools, most of them made by the local blacksmith, who definitely overcharges and definitely gossips about your hammering technique, require constant maintenance. You have to keep your blade sharp, your handles oiled, your mallets uncracked, and most importantly, you have to remember where you left them. Because there's nothing more humiliating than spending an hour searching for your crows, only to find it sitting in plain sight next to your elbow. Again. Now, all these tools do one thing, they let you shape wood. More specifically, they let you shape green wood, freshly cut, still moist timber. You prefer oak because it bends well with steam and holds up to moisture. Chestnut is decent. Beech is okay if you hate yourself. Pine is too soft unless you're making dry barrels that won't hold liquid. Everything you make relies on tight joints, compression, and geometry. There are no nails, no glue, just friction, fire, and blind optimism. You shape each stave individually. They're tapered, curved, and beveled so precisely that they create a watertight seal without any modern adhesives. If that sounds like a miracle, that's because it is. Imagine building a wine barrel that can cross an ocean, using only hand tools, guesswork, and spite. That's your daily vibe. Once the staves are shaped, you use a hoop, or temporary ropes, if you're broke, to hold them in a circle. Then comes the fire. You steam the inside of the barrel, or heat it over a flame to make the wood pliable. This part smells like wet bark, burning hope, and mild panic. Using chains or iron clamps, you slowly bend the staves into shape, hammering them tighter as you go. If you do it wrong, it cracks. Loudly. Expensively. If you do it right, you finish the bend, hammer on the permanent hoops, add the heads, and test it with water. Every time you make a barrel that doesn't leak, you feel like a god. A very tired, underpaid, splinter-covered god. You run your hand across your workbench. It's scarred, stained, and worn smooth in the spots you use most. There's sawdust in every crevice. A nail pokes out of the corner like it's trying to escape. Your mallet sits in its usual spot, heavy and reassuring. You've spent years with these tools. You know their personalities. You know which ones bite. You know which ones lie to you about being sharp. You know the sound of a draw knife cutting too deep, the weight of a hoop that's too loose, the smell of pitch when it burns just a little too hot. You are a cooper, and your tools are the only coworkers who never talk back. As the candle burns lower and the room fills with the quiet creak of settling timber, you exhale slowly. Your hands throb. Your arms ache. Your back is writing poetry about betrayal. But your tools are lined up. Your bench is ready. Tomorrow, you'll make another barrel. And maybe this time, it won't explode. We're getting spiritual, or at least mildly ceremonial, as we explore how your barrels were more than just containers. They were the vessels of life, death, celebration, punishment, and disappointment. Yes, barrels had cultural roles. This chapter is about how your humble, creaky creations became deeply embedded in the medieval psyche, church wine cellars, cargo holds, and, occasionally, full-on legal systems. Get ready for theology, fermentation, naval logistics, and why your barrel might be the reason someone hasn't died of dehydration. Or has. That too. You wake up. There's a rat chewing on your sandal. You sigh. Shoo it away. It stares at you like you've personally offended its breakfast. You begin your morning routine, which includes muttering about your joints, trying to remember why your knee hurts, answer, life, and checking your barrels to make sure none of them imploded during the night. Outside, the day is damp. Again, the weather seems to operate on a strict rotation of cold and wet, slightly less cold and wet, and sunburn in the face, frostbite in the feet. You wouldn't call it predictable, just repetitively hostile. But you've got work to do. Specifically, you're finishing off a set of small barrels for the local monastery. Yes, them. The monks. The only people in town who beg weekly, speak Latin, and ferment enough wine to make Christ consider a second resurrection. Let's talk about religion for a moment. Because as a cooper, you have more to do with holy life than you might think. Monks need barrels. Lots of them. Barrels for storing wine. Barrels for transporting ale. Barrels for pickling fish, preserving meat, and collecting alms in portable wooden containers shaped like your last good decision. It's ironic, really. You, the humble, aching barrelwright, are indirectly responsible for the Eucharist. Without your handiwork, the monk's precious sacramental wine turns into vinegar faster than you can say transubstantiation. And let's not even get started on ale. Ale is life. Ale is breakfast. Ale is safer than the water, which frequently contains things like dead frogs, mysterious wiggling, and the ghost of someone who made bad decisions upstream. So yes, your barrels keep the village hydrated. Not by carrying clean water, but by enabling the sacred fermentation of liquid bread. And that means you are a sort of fermentation priest, a patron saint of potable fluids, a damp messiah of moderate intoxication. You deliver your finished wine casks to the monastery's cellarium, a cool, dim room that smells like old grapes, incense, and quiet judgment. The monk in charge of wine production is named Brother Alaric, and he's never smiled. You're not sure he even can. He inspects your barrels with the grim focus of a man who once lost a shipment to weevils and hasn't known peace since. He nods, which is monk speak for adequate. You take that as a compliment. You walk back home, reflecting, as you often do, on how far your barrels travel. Because they do travel. Especially if they're lucky enough to be loaded onto a ship. Let's say a merchant wants to transport wine to a coastal city. Or oil. Or salted herring. Or spices that are mostly just dirt with marketing. He comes to you. He wants tight barrels, the kind that don't leak even in a storm. You spend days shaping each stave with the tender hatred of a man trying not to get underpaid again. You roast the wood, bend the joints, seal the heads. And off they go, onto carts, into wagons, down to the docks. Loaded onto a cog, or a hulk, or whatever medieval bathtub the crew is calling seaworthy this week. And once on board, your barrel becomes part of the crew. It might hold the ship's water. Terrifying. Or ale. Much better. Or salted meat. Or tack biscuit so hard they could shatter a bishop's kneecap. Sailors sleep beside your barrels. Sit on them. Hide dice in them. Occasionally, throw one overboard during a storm while screaming something about ballast. And if they're lucky, your barrel arrives intact, its contents unspoiled, its staves uncracked. You get nothing. No credit. Just the knowledge that somewhere, in a city you'll never see, someone's getting tipsy off your craftsmanship. Probably while criticizing a taste. Barrels even appear in the legal system. Yes, that's right. The medieval world, in its infinite absurdity, sometimes used barrels as instruments of punishment. Ever heard of the drunkard's cloak? It's a punishment from parts of 17th century England and Germany, where they'd take a barrel, your beautiful creation, cut holes for the head and arms, and force a drunkard to walk through the town wearing it. A literal walk of shame. Imagine spending weeks perfecting a tight joint, only for it to become someone's public humiliation costume. That said, it's good advertising. See that? Watertight and humiliating. Built by Gerald the Cooper, 3 plots down from the dung heap. But barrels aren't always shameful. Sometimes they're ceremonial. Certain guild would fill a new barrel with wine during feast days, tap it with flair, and distribute drinks to the local population. This usually resulted in drunkenness, singing, and at least one person falling into a pigsty. But it was considered festive. Weddings? Barrels. Funerals? Barrels. Baptisms? Less so. But I'm sure someone tried it once and regretted it immediately. There are even traditions where newlyweds are given a barrel of ale to take home. Presumably to drink until they stop regretting their marriage. And you, the Cooper, are at the center of all this, silently shaping the containers that contain the rituals of daily life. There's an odd sort of dignity in that. No one sings songs about you. No one commissions stained glass windows in your honor. But your work is everywhere. In the cellar, in the ship's hold, in the tavern, in the storeroom behind the apothecary, where they keep the mysterious green liquid no one talks about. Without you, the beer spoils, the meat rots, the wine turns, the feast fails. You are not glamorous, but you are essential. Even the nobility, those perfumed scarecrows on horseback, rely on you. Their imported spices come in barrels. Their waxes, their oils, their rare salted lemons that taste like poverty to everyone else. And yet, when they pass you on the road, they don't bow. They don't nod. They splash you with mud and ride on, confident their lives will remain leak-free forever. You take comfort in the quiet truth. Their wine, still in your barrel. Their perfume, still sloshing inside something you built while half asleep and full of resentment. Their taxes, still collected in casks stamped with your initials, even if they'll never ask what they mean. And maybe, just maybe, when they sip their imported Bordeaux and muse about the taste of cherries and subtle notes of oak, you'll be there. Not in person, of course, but in every stave, every hoop, every drop held tight in something you made with sore hands, a bent back, and a stubborn refusal to let the wood win. And when they toast, they're toasting you, even if they don't know it. You wake up, again, this time, to the sound of a potter bragging. He's just outside your lean-to, unloading a cart full of clay amphorae for the local merchant. You can tell because he's talking too loudly about airtight ceramic and naturally cool interior temperature and not needing metal hoops. You sigh, roll out of bed, and stub your toe on a hoop driver. Again, time to confront a truth no one asked for, but everyone needs. Your barrel has competition. And unlike actual competitions, jousting, say, or yelling at sheep, this one is long, weird, and full of misleading marketing. Let's start with the potters. Potters are the ancient influencers of the container world. Clay is old. It's Neolithic. People were storing grain in mud long before anyone knew how to pronounce oak. Amphorae were the go-to container in the Roman Empire. They're tall, skinny, made of fired clay, and shaped like a migraine. Yes, they're elegant. Yes, they stack surprisingly well if you wedge them in sand. But are they portable? No. You ever try carrying a jar taller than your toddler filled with wine over a muddy hill? Good luck. Hope you enjoy the sound of shattering dignity. A barrel? Roll it. Stack it. Tip it upright. It's the shipping container of the medieval world. Amphorae? They're beautiful. But drop one, and congratulations, you now have a mosaic and an angry merchant. And let's not forget the smell. Because once you've stored fish oil in a clay jar, it never quite smells like anything else again. That amphora is now haunted. Every olive oil shipment after that is seasoned with regret. Then there's wooden crates. Ah yes, the cooper's awkward cousin. Crates are fine if you're transporting dry goods. Wool, pottery, books, things that don't melt, rot, ferment, or leak. Crates are built using planks nailed together at angles that scream geometry is a suggestion. Waterproofing? Non-existent. Stability? Sketchy. Portability? Not unless you enjoy splinters in new and exciting places. Plus, they take up more space. A barrel's rounded shape is deceptively brilliant. It holds the same volume as a square container but rolls, stacks, and resists crushing. A crate just sits there. Useless in a flood. Too rigid. Not clever. Not elegant. You look at a crate and think, this was designed by a mun who gave up halfway through the thought. Then there's leather flasks and bottles. Oh, sweet summer child. Someone, somewhere, thought, what if we made a container out of skin and hope for the best? Leather bottles are fine if you're a peasant who drinks small quantities of ale and doesn't mind the flavor of tan cow. But for long-term storage? For trade? For anything more sophisticated than walking 2 fields over and drinking warm beer? Nope. They leak. They warp. They breathe, which sounds poetic until you realize that's just oxygen ruining your cider. And then there are bladders. Yes. Animal bladders, as in actual organs, cleaned out, dried, and tied off to make squishy, unsettling bags for wine or oil. Picture carrying your drink in a deflated pig part. Now picture it popping mid-journey. Splash has never sounded more tragic. And what about baskets? Yes, baskets. Woven, charming, completely porous. Great for carrying eggs or vegetables or disappointment. A basket holds absolutely nothing liquid. It's a storage equivalent of a smile, pretty, decorative, and completely useless in a thunderstorm. We haven't even gotten to the sacks. Sacks are cloth. Sometimes burlap. Sometimes linen. Occasionally canvas. You use them to carry dry grain or flour or the ashes of your failed dreams. Fill one with wine, and you'll get about 5 steps before your legs, clothes, and reputation are all soaked in Merlot. Sacks are not storage. They are disappointment stitched together. Even gourds, yes, hollowed-out vegetables, had their moment. You could carry a small amount of water in a gourd if you're into things that taste faintly of squash and sadness. Gourds are fine for shepherds, for one-person use, for people who don't care about bulk shipment or hygiene. But a barrel? A barrel is industrial grade. A barrel means business. A barrel is made of dozens of hand-shaped staves, each one precision cut and heat-bent into a compression seal so tight you could trap air itself. And you do it all without glue or nails. Tell that to the potter, who needs a kiln and 3 apprentices just to make something that cracks if you breathe near it wrong. You've heard the arguments. Clay preserves flavor better. Amphorae look nicer. Bladders are more eco-friendly. Sure. And square wheels are technically still wheels. Here's the truth, plain and splintered. Barrels are the peak of pre-industrial storage engineering. They're stronger than clay, more portable than crates, more hygienic than bladders, more scalable than flasks. and smarter than the people who keep trying to replace them with literal sacks of sadness. You build a barrel right, and it lasts decades. You can repurpose it, repair it, even disassemble it. It rolls. It floats. It stacks. It's the Swiss Army knife of medieval containers. And unlike that gourd full of goat's milk your neighbor's still pretending is perfectly fine, your barrel isn't going to ferment itself into a biohazard. Even in times of plague, people trust barrels. Monks bless them. Merchants stamp them. Pirates steal them. Kings demand them. Your craft is not flashy. It's not poetic. It's not carved into cathedrals or written about in heroic verse. But it works. And that's more than we can say for whoever decided it was a good idea to ship olive oil in a bucket with a cloth lid. So next time someone praises their ceramic jar or smugly hoists their goatskin flask like they've just discovered advanced chemistry, you'll smile. You'll roll your latest barrel across the yard, perfectly balanced, sealed tight, and filled with potential. And when they trip over it, that's just physics doing your marketing. This one is about hoops. Yes, hoops. The unsung metal, or wooden, if you're poor or stubborn, circles that hold your entire life's work together. The things you hammer, twist, curse at, and sometimes launch across your workshop when one refuses to sit flush on the staves. They're not glamorous. They're not even mildly photogenic. But without them, you're just assembling oddly shaped firewood. This chapter is a love letter to the circle of metal that keeps your barrels from self-destructing. Let's begin. You wake up. Again. Your back is now officially classified as unfriendly. You roll over and feel a familiar pang just beneath your shoulder blade, the one that says, "Hello, you're aging in a pre-ibuprofen world." You rise. You stretch. Something cracks. Hopefully it wasn't structural. Today's task? Hooping. That means you'll be spending the next several hours fitting iron rings onto the wooden body of a barrel with the same grace and violence as trying to get a toddler into church clothes. Let's talk about what hoops actually are. Hoops are rings, usually iron, though sometimes wooden, that you force onto a barrel to keep it from exploding in quiet protest. Each barrel has multiple hoops. There's the chime hoop, which sits right at the edge. Then the quarter hoop, further down, midway between the chime and bilge. And the bilge hoop, located at the widest part of the barrel, aka the part that has no respect for your time. In total, a standard cask has anywhere from 6 to 12 hoops, depending on size, purpose, and how much you enjoy suffering. Now, let's be clear, putting on hoops is not gentle work. You're not coaxing a baby goose into a sweater. You are slamming heated metal rings onto a cylinder of oak under tension, hoping you don't ruin 3 days of stave work because one hoop decided to shift half an inch. So what do you use? You use a driver, which sounds fancier than it is. It's just a chunk of iron designed for pounding. You use a hoop dog, which is not an animal but a vicious clamp used to pull staves inward so the hoop fits. You use fire, swearing, and the cold dead weight of generational trauma. Because unless you're a nobleman with inherited land and no concept of gravity, you have to actually work for your dinner. And in your case, that means heat-shrinking iron. Here's the fun part. Iron hoops are usually forged a little too loose. You heat them until they expand. Red hot, glowing like Satan's hula hoop. Then, carefully, while hoping no small children are watching, you lower the ring down over the barrel and let it settle into place. As it cools, the metal shrinks. This squeezes the staves together even tighter, turning your weirdly shaped wooden puzzle into a sealed, fluid-resistant miracle. And if you mess up, if the hoop isn't hot enough, if it cools too fast, if the staves aren't aligned perfectly, you've just created a $500 wooden sieve. Try explaining that to the merchant waiting on 28 gallons of fish sauce. Now, in the poorer corners of town, or in years when iron is expensive, read, always, you might find wooden hoops. These are made from hazel, ash, or willow. They're bent into shape, soaked, and tied off like they owe you money. They work until they don't. Because wood rots. Wood warps. Wood gets eaten by bugs, nibbled by rats, and questioned by rain. You try telling a monk that his wine has leaked out because you used organic hoops. See how that goes. And even when you do everything right, use iron, drive the hoops carefully, seal it with fire and prayer, there's still one final enemy, movement. Barrels roll. That's the whole point. But every roll, every jostle, every bang against a wagon axle wears on those hoops. They slide. They loosen. They get knocked out of alignment, which means you, poor fool, have to fix them. Over and over and over. You walk to the merchant's barn to check on the barrels you delivered last week. Sure enough, 2 hoops have slipped. You wedge your driver into your belt, grab the dog, and get to work. Each strike of iron on iron echoes like a curse. It's oddly satisfying in a medieval therapy sort of way. The neighbors hear it and know exactly what's happening. That's the cooper, they say. He's hooping again. They nod, as if this explains everything. And it does. Because hooping isn't just part of the job, it is the job. It's the finale, the climax, the moment when all your meticulous shaping, shaving, fitting, and steaming comes together in a thunderclap of hammer on steel. Get the hoops wrong, and nothing else matters. Your beautifully fitted staves? Worthless. Your charred and toasted interior for wine? Useless. Your bloodied thumbs and callous palms? Pointless. All because one hoop decided to slide like it's auditioning for medieval ice dancing. You tighten the last one. It fits. You breathe. You know it won't last. None of it lasts. The metal will rust. The wood will swell. Eventually, something will warp, and you'll be back here again. But for now, this barrel is tight, whole, and thanks to you, it will carry someone's ale, fish, oil, or maybe their dreams halfway across the continent, without spilling a drop. Later that night, you pass a tavern. You hear a group of people laughing, drunken, loud. One of them hoists a tankard and slurs, to the monks who brewed it. Another adds, to the barkeep who poured it. No one says, to the man who made the barrel. You smile anyway, because you know. You always know. None of them would be drinking anything if you hadn't beat the living daylights out of an iron ring 6 days ago in a freezing shed while your foot was cramping. That's what it means to be a cooper. You work behind the scenes. You don't get thanks. You just get hoops. And splinters. And the occasional moment of satisfaction when everything finally, miraculously, fits. You've built the barrel. The staves fit. The hoops hold. The ends are sealed in a way that feels vaguely like witchcraft. You've survived splinters, burns, and the unrelenting weight of functional illiteracy. Good for you. Now comes the part that no one likes to talk about. The part that smells. The part that leaks. The part that involves strange pastes, boiled animal parts, vinegar, mildew, and the crushing realization that even after all your hard work, your barrel is still not usable. Because, my friend, your creation is not finished until it is sealed. So take a deep breath. Actually, maybe don't. You're about to learn the pungent joys of medieval sealing and cleaning. You wake up. You don't want to. Because today is cleaning day. You roll out of bed, and your skin is already itchy just thinking about it. Not from sweat. Not from fleas. From knowing you're about to deal with barrel funk. See, unlike modern plastic Tupperware, your barrel is a living object. Not in the poetic tree of life kind of way. In the literal, disgusting way. The wood breathes. It absorbs. It remembers. Every liquid that's ever been stored in it leaves behind a ghost. Ale? Still foamy. Wine? A bit vinegary. Salted fish? Haunting. You, dear Cooper, are not just a craftsman. You are a barrel exorcist. Let's begin with cleaning. You do not have detergent. There is no such thing as antibacterial soap. There are no sponges. There is only fire, vinegar, sand, hot water, and existential dread. You start with a rinse. Hot water poured into the barrel, then sloshed around until it leaks out the bottom like a very unconvincing magic trick. You then add a mix of wood ash and sand, shake it violently, and hope friction scrapes away the interior film of yeasty regret. It doesn't always work. So next, you reach for your secret weapon, sulfur candles. Yes, sulfur. You light one. You drop it into the barrel. The smoke fills the interior, killing bacteria, yeasts, and anything else that dares to grow inside your sacred wooden womb. The smell? Picture someone burning an egg salad sandwich in a cathedral. The effect? Surprisingly effective. Sulfur dioxide sterilizes the inside like a medieval Lysol bomb. Of course, you shouldn't inhale too much of it. Not that anyone tells you that. You just notice your headaches getting sharper and your dreams smelling faintly of brimstone. Now comes sealing. Because wood, as mentioned earlier, is leaky. Even when staves are tight and hoops are solid, there are micro gaps, tiny pores, invisible openings through which your customer's precious cargo will happily escape into the air, ground, or rat. So what do you use? Well, if you're sealing a barrel meant for dry goods like flour, beans, or crushed dreams, you might not need anything fancy. Just extra hoops and good tension. But for liquids, you need pitch. Not musical pitch. Tree pitch. Sticky, viscous, pine-based tar. You heat it until it's bubbling. It smells like a forest is melting. Then, using a ladle or the medieval equivalent of a mistake on a stick, you pour the pitch into the barrel, rotating it carefully so it coats the inside in a thin, even layer. Too little, and it leaks. Too much, and it cracks. Get it just right, and you've created a waterproof interior that smells faintly of apocalypse and forestry. It's a balance, one you discover by ruining roughly 3 barrels for every one you succeed at. Now, if you're working for wine merchants, the stakes get higher. Wine barrels don't always get pitched. Instead, they're toasted. Toasting involves lightly charring the inside of the barrel using an open flame. This caramelizes the wood sugars, creating flavor compounds that interact with the wine, vanilla, spice, toast, smoke. Congratulations! You've just become an unpaid chemist. There's a fine line between pleasant oakiness and taste like despair. You learn to read the flame, to smell the smoke, to listen to the crackle of cellulose giving up. And if you're making barrels for fish, especially for those salt-packed fermented horrors that somehow count as food in the north, then no pitch, no toasting, just a lot of brine-proofing and a tolerance for working with things that should have been buried, not stored. These barrels are lined with salt, sometimes smoked, sometimes just sealed tight enough to let the salt do the rest. It's preservation via overwhelming saltiness, which, coincidentally, is also your personality at this point. Let's not forget about leak testing. Once the barrel is sealed, you can't just assume it works. That would be insane. You fill it with water. You wait. You stare at the seams, watching for drips. Sometimes you plug them with extra pitch. Sometimes with reed shavings. Sometimes with desperation and prayer. The worst part? Even if it doesn't leak now, it might still leak later. Because wood shrinks. It expands in wet weather, contracts in the dry. A perfect seal today could become a slow-motion disaster next week if your merchant stores it too close to the hearth. Which, of course, they always do. But the barrel doesn't care. The barrel is a test of your patience, skill, and tolerance for vaguely fishy-smelling smoke. And then there's the reconditioning. Oh yes, barrels don't get thrown out when they start to go bad. They get reused. They come back. Filthy. Cracked. Infested. Sometimes with mold. Sometimes with actual insects. You scrape. You burn. You repitch. You retoast. You whisper insults at the wood because it's the only thing that seems to respond. And through it all, you wonder, briefly, what it might be like to be a cobbler. Shoes, after all, don't leak. Usually. You're done for the day. Your arms ache. You smell like tree sap, vinegar, ash, and salt. Your lungs feel like someone smoked a ham inside your chest. But the barrel is sealed, sterilized, ready. It will outlast the person who buys it. It may end up in a monastery, a tavern, a ship, a castle. It may store beer, vinegar, honey, lamp oil, whale blubber, or salted herring. But wherever it goes, it will carry the mark of your craft. Hidden, unseen, essential. By now, you've survived the sweat of stave shaping, the scorching violence of hooping, and the fragrant nightmare that is sealing a barrel with molten pitch and sulfur smoke. Congratulations! You are now the proud parent of a roughly 55-gallon wooden container filled with who knows what. But before you celebrate by drinking some water that hasn't been touched by mold, rats, or heresy, you still have one more job. Getting the thing out of your shop. That's right. Today's riveting chapter is about transportation. Moving the barrel. Rolling the barrel. Dropping the barrel. Watching it bounce majestically into a muddy ditch, and lifting it again with tears in your eyes and 14 fewer vertebrae. Let's begin. You wake up. Your back is sending polite, prelitigious complaints to the rest of your body. Your legs feel like overcooked venison, and your arms have officially registered themselves as separate political entities seeking independence from your shoulder sockets. But you rise anyway, because the merchant is coming. He wants his barrels. They need to be loaded onto a cart, moved through the town, and shipped to whatever mildly damp, rat-adjacent place is waiting for them. And guess who's moving them? Not the merchant. Not the donkey. You. Because you're the cooper. Which means, apparently, you also moonlight as a logistics coordinator with zero pay and even less enthusiasm. Let's talk about barrel weight. A single empty oak cask, let's say a winter barrel, can weigh 80 to 120 pounds. Empty. Filled with liquid, it can easily pass 500 pounds. And you don't have a forklift. You don't even have a wheelbarrow. You have your legs, a leather apron, and a lifetime of poor decisions. But here's the beautiful thing. Barrels were designed to be moved, not lifted. Rolled. The curd shape isn't just for flair. It allows you to gently tip the barrel onto its side, then roll it across dirt, gravel, cobblestones, or your neighbor's foot. You roll it slowly. One hand braced on the top, the other at the side. This takes finesse. Too fast, and it runs away from you like a drunk dog. Too slow, and your spine starts filing complaints with your knees. Of course, if the ground isn't flat, which, spoiler alert, it never is, you're in trouble. You lean into the roll. You wedge small stones under the chimes to stop at mid-slope. You breathe like someone giving birth to a trebuchet. You wipe sweat off your brow using a sleeve that already smells like burnt tree glue and sadness. Eventually, you make it to the merchant's cart, which is either a rickety two-wheeled monstrosity pulled by a mule named something ironic like Justice, or a splinter factory on wheels operated by a teamster who hasn't smiled since the Treaty of Verdun. You heave the barrel upright. You brace your thighs. You hoist. You grunt like a beast being exorcised. And with help, curses, and the sound of every joint in your body filing retirement papers, you get the barrel into the cart. You repeat this 5 to 10 more times, depending on your contract, your desperation, or whether the merchant threatened to find a different cooper again. Because nothing motivates like economic blackmail wrapped in passive-aggressive haggling. Now, if the journey's long, or if the roads are even remotely soggy, barrels will get jostled. Which means you don't just load the barrels. You also strap them down. Using ropes probably frayed, wooden wedges, which may or may not stay put, and your own silent prayers to Saint Fiacre, patron saint of barrel-related tripping hazards. Unofficial. Why so much effort? Because if a barrel falls off a cart mid-journey, 3 things happen. It cracks. It leaks. You get blamed. Even if it was the merchant's mule that sneezed at the wrong time. Even if it was a child who ran into the road. Even if it was the moon's gravitational pull. If the barrel breaks, it's your fault. So you overstrap. You double wedge. You reinforce the corners like you're preparing for battle. And then, because nothing is ever easy, you walk behind the cart. To watch. To check. To adjust ropes when they start loosening over the course of a 12-mile journey through terrain that could best be described as medieval ankle traps. Now, if you're lucky, and we both know you're not, the cart reaches the destination unscathed. Let's say it's a dock. Because the barrels are going on a ship. Nothing says secure storage like loading several hundred pounds of precious liquid into a floating wooden coffin built by your cousin's drunk neighbor. You unload, one at a time, down a plank, into the ship's hold. Dark, damp, smelling of salt, mildew, and whatever happened to the last cooper who dropped a barrel in the sea. You brace your legs on the deck. You roll the barrels into place. You wedge them tight with blocks of wood, bundles of straw, and whatever else you can find. Because ocean travel means waves. Waves mean movement. And movement means busted hoops, exploded staves, and a cargo hold full of ruined vinegar. So you take your time. You fit each barrel like it's a puzzle piece in a game no one's ever won. And when it's all in place, you go home, back across town, through muddy streets, past the tavern, past the stable, past the apprentice who dropped out because his thumb got mashed under a hoop and he felt called to monkhood. You reach your shop. You collapse onto your workbench. You close your eyes. And you dream of barrels rolling slowly down an endless hill while a monk shouts, "That one's leaking." The next morning, you do it again. Because cooperage isn't just about crafting things. It's about moving them, protecting them, and occasionally chasing them when they develop a mind of their own and decide to roll into the nearest well. You are not thanked. You are not recognized. But deep in the cellars of castles, in the holds of ships, in the dusty back rooms of apothecaries and alehouses, your barrels endure. Because you made them. Because you moved them. Because no one else was foolish enough to do this job. You shaped the staves, hammered the hoops, sealed the inside with pitch and sulfur, and hauled your creation across medieval terrain like a human ox with trust issues. You've done it. But now comes the final and perhaps most invisible part of your work. Living with it. Because being a cooper isn't just a job. It's an identity. It's a lifestyle. It's a slow descent into existential despair, but with wood chips. Today, we are exploring the emotional weight of a trade that is at once indispensable and completely ignored. The inner life of a medieval cooper. The secret thoughts. The pride. The burnout. The strange, grim satisfaction of hearing a merchant say, "This one doesn't leak." So sit back, settle in, and remember, the cooper's burden isn't just oak. It's psychological. You wake up. Not physically. You're already halfway through your third mug of ale that's legally not ale, and eating breakfast stew made of leftover stew. You're emotionally waking up. The kind of awakening that happens when your knees creak before your eyes open. When you hear your neighbor hammering at sunrise and wonder whether it's a blacksmith or just the sound of your own mortality arriving early. You go outside. You stretch. Your apron smells like wood sap, fish brine, and sleep deprivation. You look at the stack of unfinished staves leaning against your shed. You take inventory, 3 barrels due by Thursday, 2 urgent repairs for the monastery, and 1 customer who keeps demanding a quiet barrel, whatever that means. Your hands are already tired. But you begin. Because you are a cooper. And no one really cares if you take a day off, as long as the beer keeps flowing and the salted herring stays vaguely unpoisoned. Let's talk about your social life. It's short. The barrel doesn't talk back. It doesn't ask how your day is. It doesn't compliment your beard or your soup. And when it explodes from pressure, it doesn't apologize. Your job is physical, repetitive, lonely, but also oddly meditative. If your idea of meditation involves splinters under your fingernails and hot pitch bubbling dangerously close to your ankles. Your friends? You have a few. The blacksmith, maybe. You trade iron hoops for wood plugs and insult each other out of affection. The brewer? You see him a lot. He brings you new barrels to replace the ones ruined by weather, which is code for he dropped it on the dog. The monk with the weird eyes? He stops by for honey barrels and mumbles about alchemy. He probably has a basement full of frogs and secrets. But most people don't want to hear about barrels. They want to drink from them. They want to fill them. They do not want to hear you talk for 45 minutes about the grain pattern of French oak and why one stave curved inward means an entire week of rework. So you keep it to yourself. You internalize your victories. You fix the leak no one saw. You rehoop the cracked cask no one thanked you for. You watch from the tavern corner as someone taps your barrel and says, "This is a good batch." You nod. You sip your ale. And silently whisper, "You're welcome." Let's talk about burnout. Yes, it exists. Even in the 1300s. You're tired. Always. Not in the "I'll sleep it off" kind of way. In the "my soul feels like a badly made bung plug" kind of way. The work never ends. Because everything needs a barrel. Ale. Salted meat. Wine. Rainwater. Soap. Nails. Flour. Eel jelly. Pickled things that should never have been pickled. Your town doesn't function without you. But no one quite realizes that. The wheelwright gets glory. He builds transport. The blacksmith? Respected. Feared. Useful in a duel. The cooper? You're the person whose handiwork people sit on when there aren't enough chairs. You are the storage solution. And no one thanks the storage solution. Still, every now and then, you get a taste of glory. A knight might compliment the polish on a barrel used for storing tournament wine. A monk might bless your cask before it sails to another continent. A child might roll an empty one down a hill and laugh. These are your parades. Sad. Subtle. Mostly silent. But real. Then there's the rage. The quiet, measured, simmering fury of watching someone use your perfectly balanced, expertly shaped, beautifully sealed cask as a stool. table, washing basin, stepladder, literal footrest. You walk by. You see it. The barrel's chime dented. A hoop bent. Someone's muddy boot print on the toasted interior. You spend an entire morning adjusting with surgical fire. And what do they say? Oh, it's just a barrel. You pause. You say nothing. But in your mind, you light their barn on fire with a sulfur candle and replace all their cider with sheep urine. But you don't. You breathe. You walk on. Because you are a Cooper. And we bottle our emotions. Like everything else. Now let's talk about pride. Yes, you have it. In small, awkward doses. Sometimes you visit the tavern and see your barrels stacked behind the bar, each one still tight, still solid, still holding strong after months of use. You nod at the tap. You listen for drips. There are none. You go to the docks. See your cargo barrels being lowered into a ship's belly. Still round. Still watertight. Still alive. You watch the merchant count them. You hear them grumble. But not about your barrels. No, your barrels are perfect. It's the sailors who are drunk. The rats who are unruly. The tides who don't cooperate. Your barrels? Reliable. And when you die, yes, sorry, you do die eventually. Your hands gnarled. Your back hunched. Your apron stiff with 1,000 layers of pitch and pain. They bury you in a simple grave. A few people show up. Someone might say, he made good barrels. And someone else might say, wait, who? But your barrels? They outlive you. They sit in cellars for decades. They cross seas. They carry oil to distant ports. They hold apples in winter. They float during floods. They roll long after you've stopped moving. And maybe, just maybe, a young Cooper sees one of your old casks, checks the hoops, knocks on the wood, and whispers, still good. And in that whisper, you live again.